Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are dialing in from the globe today. A warm welcome to our webinar this morning for our April edition. A lot to cover this morning, a lot of takeaways and a lot of things for you to learn. We've got the delightful Caroline Kavanagh who's going to be hosting today's webinar. Whilst we are welcoming everybody into the room, use the chat, say hi, give us thumbs up, use the emojis, tell us where you're dialing in from today. It would be great to see where everybody is from. For those who have never met me, Drew is my formal name, as you can see on the screen, but everybody within our community refers to me or knows to me as Drew. And I'm one of the CPD advisors here. So a warm welcome to every single one of you. I'm calling today from what is quite an overcast northwest of England. For those that know the Manchester region, I'm just in between Manchester and Birmingham, if you know that M6 corridor. So yeah, we're supposed to be spring here. The temperature's kind of rising nicely. Not quite there yet, but fingers crossed we're heading in the right direction. So a warm welcome, Joanne. Good to see you. How are you? Newcastle City Council from the northeast. YI man. We got the sunny Isle of Wight. Linda, good to see you, Linda. Lagos, Nigeria. Good to see you. Mike, good to see you, Mike. Good morning. This is your first CPD session. Looking forward to it. Good for you. Alan, good morning as well. Whilst people are coming in, say hi. And yeah, we'll get cracking with this morning's webinar. Just whilst people are still coming in, just go through a few housekeeping rules to begin with. Thank you, Kirsty. Oh, Kirsty, how could I forget? Kirsty, my partner in crime from CPD Standards.
Hi,
Kirsty,
everyone.
doing our tech. Kirsty, how can I forget you, my dear? So use the chat throughout the session today, folks. Let's keep it interactive. If you've got any questions, there will be a Q&A at the end. But as Caroline goes through the presentation and what she's going to share with you today, if there is a moment for interaction and to come to the questions, we'll jump. So use the chat as much as you can, folks. It is being recorded, so it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel for the CPD community. For those who can't make it today, it will be up there. So if you want to leave your cameras on, you're welcome to. But if I can just ask everybody, please, just to mute, just in case for background noises and things like that. But use the chat as much as you can, please, folks. Lots to go through and for us to learn today. That is it from me. Just a very brief introduction and a welcome whilst people are coming in. So let's get to it. Today, it is a 50-minute webinar with a Q&A session at the end. And this brings me straight into our host and presenter today, which is, of course, how to optimize learning for anxious learners. We've got the delightful Caroline Kavanagh, and a little bit of background about Caroline. She's an author of a book, Anxiety Alchemy. She's an avid dog lover, and outside of work, she is a netball umpire in the UK and overseas as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Caroline, over to you. Good to see you.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. And it's lovely to have some people here from slightly warmer climes, as we say. Not too brilliant for here for the end of April in the UK. One of my perceptions is that our time is our most valuable resource. So I'm going to do my utmost to make your investment in coming to this webinar and spending the next hour with us today show a really good return on that investment. So what we're going to be going through is firstly looking at anxiety itself. What is it and how can you use anxiety in a positive way to actually create a good outcome within your learning environment? Because one of the things that we see such a lot is anxiety is seen as something that's very negative. It doesn't need to be that way. We're going to address two principles, two concepts that you can use consistently in lots of different ways to help reduce anxiety for your learners, because that's the ultimate aim, is the less the anxiety, the more they're going to learn. So there's two concepts we're going to be coming back to time and time again throughout the session today. I'm going to be looking at some of the signs that you can keep on your radar that might start to suggest to you that someone's getting anxious, so that you can take action early. And I'm going to be sharing a myriad, if I can get the words out, it is Monday morning here, of tips and techniques that you can use, have in your toolbox to bring out at an appropriate time. As Drew said, we will have a Q&A session at the end, but if you're anything like me, questions will be popping up as they come through. So what I suggest is, if you've got a question, pop it into the chat room, but put either a Q or an asterisk in front of it, and then Drew and Kirsty will pick them up so that you can then let it go out your head, and it will be confident it will still get answered at the end. If at the end your question hasn't been answered, I will be hanging around in the room. We can stay on, or if Kirsty needs to actually go and do some work today, then you're very welcome to contact me either through my website or link up with me on LinkedIn, and we can arrange to have a quick chat one-to-one at another time later in the week. As a trainer and as a professional speaker, I'm often very mindful that people have they're well trained, they've got certain techniques. And one of the things that most trainers will always do is establish their credibility as to, why am I the person that's standing in front of all of you today? Now, I don't want to use a lot of time doing that. Drew's told you a little bit about me. Yeah, I love dogs and I run around with a whistle quite a lot. But in terms of my credibility of being here today and running this session, I am a clinical hypnotherapist and I specialize in anxiety. I've worked with over 800 clients, and that sums up some over 5,000 clinical hours. And it's that experience of working day in, day out of people who are anxious that I'm bringing to you today, overlaid with having delivered a lot of training sessions. In my previous life, I was a marketing consultant, and I used to deliver a lot of lectures at postgraduate level. And then now in my current career, also doing professional speaking to audiences. So these are really the three strings to my bow that has brought together the content that we're going to go through today. So with no further ado, let's get some slides going. Okay, everyone see those okay? Perfect. So let's look at this word anxiety. Why are my slides not moving on? There we go. What I would love you to do is, in the chat room, just quickly type your definition of what anxiety actually is. Just have a quick share. What do you see, what would you define anxiety as being? Worry, yeah. So just pop into the chat room. How would you define anxiety? Good one there, Joanne, about things that may or may not happen. Fear, feeling uneasy, and perfectionism. Nice one, John. Yeah. That's often a cause of anxiety, is someone that's seeking perfectionism. Unease, fear. Yeah, so we've got lots of common things. All consuming. That's an interesting perspective, Amanda. Like that. Okay, keep those coming through. Lack of confidence. Excellent. So a lot of these things that are coming into the chat room now, I would perceive as being negative. Let's get right back to basics. Anxiety is a more socially acceptable word for fear. Fear is a four-lettered F word, and a bit like that other one, it doesn't tend to go down well when you use it. So we have created this word anxiety to make it more acceptable within our language. I often hear people say, I have anxiety, or I'm suffering from anxiety. And you could just as easily put flu in that sentence. I have flu, I'm suffering from flu. And it is one of the few emotions that we have started to separate. You never hear someone say, I have guilt, or I have happiness. We say, I am guilty, I am happy. We internalize it. But with anxiety, we have externalized it. It's something outside of us. And that starts to lead to a lack of control. If it's outside of us, I can't control it. And so it is becoming like flu, like an illness that you can't control, and it's a condition. And I work a lot with teenagers. So quick hands up in your room if if you work a lot with teenagers. And so I don't know if you see this as well, but it's almost as if anxiety is becoming a badge of honor with teenagers. If they're not feeling anxious, there's something wrong with them. And the irony being, that's true. If you don't experience anxiety, you will not survive. Because the fundamental principle of fear is survival. We're born with two emotions, fear and love. If a baby is experiencing fear, they will cry. And that's saying that mummy thing, that parent thing, cold, I'm hungry, I'm tired. Because if any of those things are not resolved, that baby's life is put at risk. So fear is intrinsically linked to our most primitive survival instinct, the fight or flight response. So without fear, you really will be in trouble, because fear is the thing that stops us putting our hands on something hot, stops us from driving through red traffic lights. Fear keeps us safe. And the role of fear is to avoid that risk. So we all have anxiety. It's something that needs to be normalized. But clearly we experience it in different ways. And that's due to our perceptions of risk. It's why some people can jump out of an aeroplane with nothing but a piece of silk over their head, whereas other people are terrified of even getting on an aeroplane. It's why some people will always go to the same hotel and eat in the same restaurant on every holiday, whereas others will want to go to somewhere new every time. We all have a comfort zone. And within the comfort zone, it's where we feel safe. For some reason, my clicker's not working today. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to restart, and hopefully then it will be happier. Let me try doing it that way. There we go. We have life. So comfort zone. It's really a bit of a misnomer. What we should be calling the comfort zone is the familiarity zone, because everything inside our comfort zone we are familiar with. Doesn't necessarily mean it is comfortable. It means we are familiar with it. When we step out of the comfort zone is when we're stepping outside of the familiarity. Anything outside our comfort zone is by definition uncomfortable. That's where growth happens. As trainers, that's what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to help our learners grow. So we will be taking people outside of their comfort zone. Let's talk a little bit more, dive back into how anxiety is created. Within our mind, we have two parts. Frontal lobes here is the part we call the conscious mind. It's rational, logical, deductive, and has the ability to go out into the past or out into the future. At the rear part of the brain is the part we call the subconscious, which is irrational, illogical, immature, only lives in the now. Because the primary role of this part of the brain is that survival. It's where that fight or flight instinct lives. But it has the typical age of a 4-year-old. And that's not being derogatory to any of you. I've got a 4-year-old that sits at the back of the mind there. And the primary role of that 4-year-old is looking for risk. And it's like we have this big radar that's looking for risk all of the time. And if that radar gets pinged, it goes straight to the subconscious for a response in that moment, which when we lived in caves worked perfectly. If a saber-toothed tiger came into the cave, caveman needed to act instantly. Whereas if he related to his conscious mind and started thinking, shall I run away? Shall I fight the tiger? It'd have been supper. And even though we don't live in caves in the same way anymore, we still have that primitive instinct running for us. Anxiety is purely that chemical reaction that we name anxiety. It's the mind releasing adrenaline into the system that facilitates that fight or flight response, that turns your tummy into a washing machine, that makes your hands sweat, that sends your heart racing, because all of those things are facilitating the ability to either run away or fight the perceived risk, which, as I said, as a caveman, tiger in front of you is ideal. But there is a slight biological misfunction that is what is the cause of mass anxiety today. And that is that the subconscious mind, that 4-year-old, cannot tell the difference between reality and imagination. So if the wise, logical part of the brain that's thinking about something in the past or something in the future starts to trigger something that was bad in the past or maybe a risk in the future, the subconscious mind treats it as if it is the now and kicks off that fight or flight response. When something is happening in the now, like that saber-toothed tiger, it comes to a conclusion very quickly. Either the tiger gets killed or the caveman is supper. But when we're reacting to nothing more than a thought, that thought can kick around in your head for hours, days, weeks. And that is mentally very, very demanding. But that's the reality of how our anxiety is worked, because now we live in a society where a lot of things are triggering that radar that isn't real. Someone put in the message something, worrying about something in the past or in the future. It doesn't come to a conclusion, so the body keeps trying to fight a risk that isn't real. And it doesn't even end there. We are also programmed to catastrophize. So, ironically, one of my biggest fears when I do a webinar or, largely a webinar because it's the technology, is what if the technology doesn't work? When our minds are programmed to answer any question that you give it. So when I ask that question to my own mind, it goes, well, if the technology doesn't work, then you're going to look like a real plonker. And if you're a real plonker, then you're not going to be invited back to the next webinar, and they may not even pay you. And if they don't pay you, you're not going to be able to pay the mortgage this month. And if you can't pay the mortgage this month, your husband may leave you and you're going to end up homeless. That's how the mind works. It leads from one question to another. And it may sound a little bit far-fetched. I'm obviously doing this a little bit for creating a point. Our minds will catastrophize. And all of these things are what is happening to your anxious learners when they come into the training environment. They are going to be thinking about potential risks in that training course that they're going on. So they will have been getting into a chemical environment within their body, which is also going to be triggering the catastrophizing response, and they will be turning up already mentally depleted. So they are seeing risk at anything that is outside of their comfort zone. But the antidote to risk is control. So reducing risk by increasing control is one of the first of the two concepts that we're really going to be focusing on today. But before we go any further, let's just have a real quick summary. Anxiety keeps us safe. So one of the first things I want you to consider doing in your training environments is start to normalize anxiety. We will all be feeling it, but you're feeling those feelings because your body is now ready to actually perform at a higher level. It's that fight or flight response. And because you're here, you're fighting. That is a good thing. And when you're alert in that fight arousal state, you're in a better state for learning. So start to normalize anxiety and turn it into a positive in a learning environment that's going to help them. Acknowledging that anxiety is a response to risk, and risk is reduced when there is more control. So let's start now looking more at risk. By definition, as an anxiety expert, when people come to me, they are struggling with anxiety. So as soon as someone starts to build a relationship with me, the first thing that I do is I send them a video. The video shows a car driving up onto my drive, so they know what my house looks like, so they become less worried about getting lost. It leads them through my house, so they see my dogs, they know they're going to pick up a cup of tea in the kitchen on the way through to where we work. They'll see the room that we work in, and then I will talk them through exactly what we do in the first session. So for an anxious person, they already, before they even commit to having a session with me, know what they may be letting themselves in for. They're taking back control of being able to make a decision that's right for them. When they turn up for that first session, I make sure we follow exactly what they've seen on the video. When we're sitting in front of each other, I will do that normalizing of anxiety. I will recognize that they're anxious and say, I know you're a little bit anxious, but you know, so am I, because I don't know you, and I'm really not sure what we're going to be going through today in terms of what you're here for, but that's okay. I will recognize that some of them are sitting on the edge of their chair, and I'll actually say to them, I know you're anxious because you're sitting on the edge of the chair, and that's okay, because if you are lounging back in your chair, that isn't appropriate behavior for someone that's in front of a complete stranger. That would be wrong. So all of these things are reinforcing you're safe, you're okay. The next thing I start to do is using mirroring and matching. Now, some of you may be familiar with this. Mirroring is reflecting someone's non-verbal communication, how they're sitting, as if you were looking in a mirror. Matching would be doing the same. So if someone was, let's say, in a training room, sitting down with a hand on the right arm, if I was mirroring it, I'd be doing it with my left arm. If I was matching it, I'd be doing with my right arm too. What this is doing is starting to build rapport. It's working, again, very much at the subconscious level, saying, I get you. I'm like you. Now, it is quite hard to do in a training room. You can think about doing when you first meet someone. If someone is quite quiet and shy, dancing up to them and going, oh, you're really welcome, is the complete opposite of what they need. So if someone's quiet, approach them in quite a quiet way, match the tone of their voice. If someone's bouncy, be bouncy. It's also easier to do if you're working with someone in perhaps a small breakout group. If you've got 2 or 3 people, you can mirror and match the behavior or the non-verbal behavior in that way much more easily. It is quite difficult on screen, so that's something that's really, when it comes to webinars, you have to park. But the other thing that we can do is one of my personal favorites. So forgive me if I get a little bit overexcited about this. Languaging and the representational system. The representational system is just a really posh word for recognizing that we all have a dominant sense. 40% of us are visually dominated, 40% are kinesthetic, touchy-feely, 10% are audio, and 10% audio digital. Now, it's not as clear-cut as that. It just means that we all use all of our senses, but we have a preference for one of those senses. So let's say that we have 40% in our room that are visually dominated people. As a visual trainer, you will be using words such as, can you see what I mean? Can you imagine how that would happen? And that would literally be pressing the buttons of the visual learners in the room, turning them on in an academic way, I hasten to add. And that connection, again, subliminally, is building rapport. It's building a connection with other visual learners. Our kinesthetic learners, our green people, are still turned off at the moment. They will respond to language such as, how does that make you feel? Can you get to grips with that? Can you grab hold of that as an idea? They're the kind of words that, again, are going to be connecting with them on a subliminal level. We then bring in our audio learners. They're going to be reacting to phrases such as, can you hear my meaning? How does that sound to you? And then we have our last 10%, our audio digital. These are people that love processes and procedures. They like to know how you get from A to B to C. So the sort of language that's going to turn them on are things like, can you get that as a concept? Can you see how we got from A to B? Does that make sense to you? As trainers, as people communicating, we will typically use the language of our own dominant sense. That means that potentially you're only creating that rapport with a relatively small percentage of the people in your room. But with practice, you can start to bring in other words. And the more different words that you can use, the more connections you are going to be making with your audience. It does take a little bit of practice. So what I suggest you do if you are interested in this is there is a download on my website. You'll just see it, it's the representational system. Download that, take a look at it. Firstly, identify your own dominant sense. Then you know where you stand. It's great fun to do with other significant people in your life, with your partner, perhaps with your children, because then it starts to understand why there may be friction sometimes if you're not using the right language to push the right buttons. And then you can start really listening to the language in other people and start to pick it up. Because if you, for example, you're let's say you're a visual person and you're working with an audio digital person, those languages are really quite different. But when you start to use the language with them, you will start to see a warming in their energy towards you, a greater rapport that's being built. And just out of interest, if you've ever just instantly clicked with someone, the chances are their representational system profile is very closely aligned with yours. You just get each other. Whereas if you meet someone that you just can't get on, the chances are their representational profile is the diametric opposite to yours. But when you recognize that and you start to use their language, again, that rapport will start to be established. So we use mirroring and matching to reduce the risk. And by using that representational system language, we're starting to build more rapport. Where there's rapport, there's more safety, less risk. So our next concept is that of unity. So we're going to park risk for just a second and talk just briefly on unity. I'd like you to imagine that you are in a forest. It's quite a dense forest. It's twilight, you're losing light, and you're on your own. Chances are that you'd be a little bit nervous. But then someone else comes along. There's two of you. You're probably still going to feel fairly nervous, but less nervous because you're not on your own. But a few more people trickle in. There's half a dozen of you. Anxiety levels are coming down because there is safety in numbers. And if there was 200 of you in that forest, probably wouldn't be anxious at all. Because again, back to when we lived in caves, cavemen would not survive if they were on their own. They needed the tribe, they needed the pack to keep safe. And that, again, is still a primitive program that is running deep down in our psychology. So the more we feel connected, the more we feel unity with others, the less anxious we tend to feel. So the way I tend to start my sessions when I'm working in a group that starts to build this unity is something I call the blue things game. I would love to say it was mine, but it's not. I stole it. So you are more than welcome to use this as well if you haven't got something that's the equivalent. So we're going to do it because it's really, really simple. In a second, I'm going to count to 5, and I would like you to look around the environment where you're sitting and count how many blue things that you can see, and then just put that number straight in the chat box. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Type that number into the chat box. Okay, so we've got 9, 2s, 4s, 7s, all sorts. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So if we were doing this in a in-person event, I'd get people just to shout them out. And what inevitably happens in a room is someone will say 12, someone else will say 2. So I was like, come, you can see 12, you can see 2. Seeing that you're not, you make a little bit of humour out of it. Then I'll say, how many green things did you see? And without fail, whenever I've done this, there is a silence, there's a pause. So people have that kind of, hang on, you told me to look for blue things. There's a confusion. And that confusion is unifying. Everyone has just had exactly the same experience. The original point of this game was to recognize that we all see things differently. And what you focus on becomes your reality. So if you look for blue things, you'll see them. And even though the green things were there, you didn't see them. And we can use that then in a learning environment to say, we are all going to be seeing things differently throughout the day. Some things people will not notice, but other people will because they were giving their focus to them. And that's a really nice segue to building in this message that I'm sure most of you do, is that there are no stupid questions, there are no wrong answers, because we all see things differently, we all have different lines of focus, and that is okay. It's also a really lovely exercise to unify, because everyone has just had that same experience. Humour is also a really unifying thing because anyone that laughs together, again, has a common bonding. But most importantly, for anyone who is really anxious in the room, they've just done the first exercise and it was easy. So their confidence is going to be raised. They're going to be a little less anxious because they've just done something that was okay, and their anxiety will have dropped a little bit. Can you believe it? My clicker has just died again, and so is my laptop. Isn't it ironic? I said the worst thing that's scared for me is my technology not working, and here we go. The technology is not working. Let's go down. We were there. Another thing that we can do in terms of unifying is coming back to language. We and us. Societally, we often start to use the word I a lot more, I and you. And if you listen to any conversations going on, listen for those words and they will very much be dominant. What I encourage you to do in a training environment is really focus hard on using the words we and us. Again, this is working at a deep psychological level, subliminal level. Your students won't even be aware of it. It will be having an impact. So the more you can start saying, this is what we're going to do today, this is us having an experience, that will all start to be reinforcing this unity of what the common experience is to all of us. Because back to that forest example, if you are separated, if you feel on your own, it's anxious. But when you're part of a community, all having a shared experience, you feel much more safe. Risk is reduced. So these two things are now starting to unite. Reducing risk by heightening control and having a common unity where you are not on your own, because the more links you have with someone, the safer that you feel. The safer you feel, the less anxiety there is. So again, just summing up on this, we can reduce anxiety by building trust through creating rapport, mirroring, matching, using the representational system, and using language to heighten that connection. The representational system, we and us, and using humor where you can. So now let's start looking at the signs of anxiety. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the very common ones, the closed body language, the avoidance of any eye contact. That straight away will start to give you the indication that that person is feeling nervous. But there are two other experiences that are often misread. They are actually based on anxiety. And the first of those is anger. Anger is actually the fight element of the fight or flight response. It's often fueled by fear. And I remember I did a session last year, and a woman walked into the room, and the hostility emanating off her was amazing. She walked straight up to me and started ranting. How dare I run a session at this time of day? She'd just been stuck in traffic for goodness knows how long. And, why are we in this venue? I couldn't find it. What felt like a very long couple of minutes of just verbal ranting. When people attack you, the natural response is to put your gloves on and to respond as like. But I could recognize that this behavior was being fueled by anxiety. So I very quietly walked up to her with a big smile and said, "Hi, my name's Caroline. I'm so sorry you've had such an awful experience getting here, but thank you so much for battling through and making it here." Instantly, that hostility dropped, because by empathizing with her, she'd no longer got someone to fight against. She'd got someone that was positioning themselves as an ally, building that connection with her. So it's something to have on your radar. If you have an aggressive person, do start to think, is the emotion underneath this that's fueling the anger actually anxiety? And rather than put on your gloves, unless you really do have a Tyson Fury in front of you, treat them with kid gloves. You may also get someone becoming angry during a training session. Again, have it on your radar. Is this person actually anxious? It may be that for some reason they're falling behind the learning. They're not managing to keep up, and they're feeling vulnerable. They're feeling threatened. So have that on your radar. They're not just an angry person. Is there something that has triggered their risk radar? And their natural reaction as an individual is the fight rather than the flight. The other example of a person that can be anxious, but it's not immediately obvious, and I'm sure you've all come across them in your training environments, is what I call the person that knows it all. They're the person that wants to answer every question, that's got a story for every single example. But again, have it on your radar that this person may actually be very anxious. And there are certain things that when you look for, can start to identify, are they a genuine know-it-all, and you've got someone that likes the sound of their own voice, and I'm sure through your experience you've got ways to handle that behavior. Or are they someone whose behavior is being triggered by feelings of fear? And there's three things that you can look for. Firstly, Who are they interacting with? If they are looking at everyone else when they're talking, and within their groups, it's me, 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 I'm talking, I've got all of the answers, then they're probably a know-it-all. However, if all of their dialogue is focused at you, then they are trying to build that security in a relationship with you. They're trying to form that relationship, that behavior that reduces the risk. Also, take a look at their hands. People that are anxious will often fiddle with things. So if their hands are busy, and this is also particular to some neurodivergent learners, which we're going to touch on in just a sec, that may be a sign to you that this person is feeling very anxious. Their body language and their verbal language are incongruent. A great red flag for this person is anxious, and they're overcompensating for anxiety by being overtly loud. And the third thing is listening to their language. The know-it-all is going to be using I a lot of the time. I do this. I know about this. This is my experience. Whereas someone who is anxious, that is trying to build that security with you, will be using the word you more. What do you think about this? How would you react in this behavior? So look at those two differentiators, and if those three things are there, that is very much an indicator for you that this person is feeling anxious. And then you can dive in your toolbox to start thinking about how can I reduce the risk for them by giving them back a level of control. Which leads us very nicely onto neurodiversity. So the current statistics that I researched last week is that 1 in 5 people are now diagnosed with some form of neurodiversity, which means that in a class of 20 people, you are going to have 4 or 5 who have some sort of atypical neurology going on. So it's really important now, I believe, as trainers, that we really empathize with this sector of society and do all that we can to make sure that they get the most out of the learning too. There are many different types of neurodiversity. So for today's purpose, I'm going to group them together and give you some ideas of things that you can start doing to help these learners. Because coming right back to where we started, these are learners that will be perceiving risk days, possibly weeks in front of the training course, and without your support will be turning up in that very depleted state. So there's things that we can start doing, like I did with my video to my clients, before your training even starts. And that really starts with the joining instructions. Really think through anything that is a potential unknown outside of the comfort zone for that individual. Because as trainers, we feel very comfortable. We probably know where to park when we go to a regular training session. We know where the room is. We certainly know how the session is going to run. But those are all unknowns for our delegates. So in the joining instructions, go up a whole nother level in terms of the details that you give. Is there parking? Do they need to go through a security gate? How far is it from the parking to the entrance? Do they need to go in the main entrance, or is there a second door that they need to go through? Will there be a receptionist to tell them where to go? And if not, give them directions on how to find the room. Also things like dress code. Again, for typical learners, doesn't matter. But for a neurodivergent learner, they will be worrying about, what if I have the wrong dress? So state, is it casual? You can come in jeans. Be very specific. Also a high degree of specificity on timing. If it's 8:45 for 9, make it clear. At 8:45, we can meet for a cup of coffee and we'll be sitting down to start the session at 9. Neurodivergent learners will often turn up really, really early because they do not want to be late. There is also a section of neurodivergent learners who, if they're going to start at 9, will turn up at 30 seconds before 9 because you said be there at 9. So if it's confusing, then they will already be feeling vulnerable and their anxiety levels will go up. And even something as simple as refreshments. If you say refreshments available to a neurodivergent learner, what does that mean? Is there going to be tea and coffee? Will there be a cold drink? So be specific. There's going to be a range of drinks. If you have a particular tea bag that you love, bring it with you. Bring a flask of something you love. Now, some trainers look at me and they go, really? Is that not going to make all of our neurotypical learners go, what on earth is this? And the answer is no. Often the typical learners at worst will go, it's a bit overboard. That's it. But most of them will also be grateful for that level of detail as well. So in simple, detail, detail, and more detail is going to help your neurodivergent learners take back control, making the decisions that are right for them so that when they turn up in your hall, in your room, they are in the best possible state that they can be. So let's look what we can do in the room once the session has started. A lot of neurodivergent learners will want to be either close to the door or have their back to a wall. So this is another thing to have on your radar. Neurodivergent learners will often turn up early to Bagsy one of those seats. Let them. If you have a holding area, because you like to keep people out of the room before it starts, if you start to see someone getting agitated, look in the room, do ask to them, do you know, would it help you to go in and Bagsy your seat first? Let them do so, because their seating position is going to be absolutely implicit on how much they are able to concentrate throughout your session. And again, as you start the session, detail, detail, detail to reduce that perceived risk. So for example, I used to work in a room that had 2 temperatures, too hot and too cold. So I would say to all of my delegates, look, this room is a nightmare for temperature. So we're all going to be getting too hot or we're all going to be freezing. So feel free to layer up or peel off that keeps you feeling as comfortable as you can be. Because again, a neurodivergent learner will often get hot quickly because of the stress. So if you give them permission to take their jacket off, that will be easier for them to do so they feel more comfortable. Give them the detail of what's going on throughout the session. If possible, put it on a handout so they have the timings, even to the detail of, in this session, we're going to have these 3 key learning points, because they can then scan through and go, oh yeah, I know a little bit about that. I know I'm going to be doing an exercise here. That is giving them back control, which is reducing the risk, which is lowering their anxiety. Be approachable. I'm sure many of you are, but just simply standing in the front of the room and saying, I'm doing everything to help you so that we get the most out of this session today. So if there's anything that I can do to make your day better, please come and speak to me. Consider your position in the room. A lot of neurodivergent learners do lip read, and they will certainly be using facial expressions as one of the cues to understand what's going on. So if you're standing with a window behind you and your face is in shadow, they may not be able to do that. So just be aware of your positioning in a room and lighting, so as far as possible, people can see your face clearly. It will make a huge difference to their level of comfort. And as I touched on earlier, a lot of neurodivergents will fiddle with their hands. And I picked up this brilliant tip from a colleague of mine. She said she will take a pack of blue tack. So for those of you that are perhaps don't know blue tack, it's like a plasticine. It's like something you can use to stick bits of paper on the wall, and you can pull it apart and remold it. She takes a packet of blue tack and puts little blobs of it all around on every table. And she said quite often the neurotypical will go, what's this blue tack? Within 15 minutes, they've got a bit of it in their hands and they're fiddling with it. For the neurodivergent people, they will absolutely love you because you are straight away giving permission for them to fiddle. And if they do have their own fiddly toys, then it gives them a greater ability to take them out and use them. And also have it on your radar that if someone is on their phone, the chances are, as a neurodivergent, they're not being rude. It's just the thought has popped in their head that on the way home, they need to pick up a packet of biscuits. And if they don't get their thought out of their head into their notes on their phone, they will not be able to concentrate for the rest of the session. They may also be making notes on their phone. A lot of neurodivergents have created their own ways, have their own apps to be able to record information. So again, have that on your radar and check in, is that person being rude? Because it's a possibility, but it may be they're using their phone in a way that's supporting them to get the most out of your session too. And lastly, for all of these things, when we put them back in a webinar scenario, same principle, have the rules clear for being online. Do you want people to keep their camera on? Or as Drew very well did at the beginning of this, keep your cameras on or off, it's your choice, but please be muted. Make the rules clear so that people understand the expectation. But there's a couple of lovely phrases that, again, I picked up this colleague of mine that you can use as well. If you feel up to it today, it would be lovely if you kept your camera on, because it's lovely to see all your smiling faces as we're going through this session. However, if you're having a particularly rough day and you want to keep your camera off, that's absolutely fine. Do try and get involved in the chat room. But even if that's a bit too tricky for today and you have questions, you're very welcome to message me directly and I will ask them on your behalf. So again, find the ways that makes it easy for your learners to communicate and interact in a way that they feel is the safest for them. And then the final section we're going to move on to today before we look at the Q&A session is activities. What can you do with activities, again, to help people who are feeling anxious? And my best advice is to have different ways to achieve the same learning objective. Different ways that will get you back to the same place. So for example, you may have a role play. You can also then create a case study and invite people, if they want to work through the case study in a small group or in pairs or on their own. That's okay. So suddenly people have 4 choices. They can go and do the role play. You bunch go in that corner of the room. If you want to work on a case study as a group, go over to that corner of the room. If you want to work in a pair, stay there. If you're on your own, stay where you're sitting. And also make it clear that the choice of this activity doesn't mean that you have to do the same in the future learning activities you do. You can do a role play now and you can work singly in the future. And signpost all the way through. As you may have noticed, I've been doing today. We've now got to the end of this section. So we've got a summary, which is signposting. We're getting to the next session. All of these things are helping anxious learners going, I know where we are, and I'm not being surprised by something coming up that I wasn't aware of. You're making it aware. I know I'm about to step out of my comfort zone again. It is reducing their risk by giving them control. The other thing that's very useful to use is anchoring. If you've ever studied NLP, you might be very familiar with this. So anchoring can be used physically, and I used to love using it when I was lecturing. I used to typically lecture in a U-shaped format. So when I wanted to make a really key point, one of those learning objectives I wanted everyone to get, I would wander to this point, which was around the middle of the top of the U. So I had 2 learners either side and most of the people in front of me. I would stand very still and I'd drop my voice and say, okay, the next point I'm going to make is really important. And everyone would pick up their pen and be listening in. I'd make the point and then I'd wander off. Carry on talking. Then I'd do it again. Okay, we have another really important point I want everyone to get. Deliver that point, wander off. Within 3 or 4 of those points, as soon as I started wandering towards that same point in the room, everyone went, it's another one of those really important things. So it helped me as a trainer make sure that for everyone, the real key messages were ones that they took on board. In a webinar, that's a little bit trickier to do. What you can do is what we call gamify it. So, for example, if you've got 7 key learning points, you can use the 7 colours of the rainbow. Right, we've got 7 key learning points today. Here's the red learning point. Deliver it. Carry on talking. Okay, everyone, we've now got the orange learning point. Jot it down. And that's a great way at the end of the session to really check learning by saying, right, has everyone got all of their rainbow colours, or do you need me to go over any of them again? If you've got 5 learning points, you can maybe use the big 5 in a safari. Use something that is relatable, that gives people hooks to hang on, that they know this is something important, I'm going to concentrate on that. And you will notice that as soon as you use anchoring, you get people's concentration. So even for those people that are feeling anxious, they know this is important, they dig deep, and they get that learning point internalized. So again, just summing up activities, look for multiple ways of achieving the same objective. Use anchors, use signposts, and help all of the learners stay along line with you. Gamify where possible, because again, that is very unifying for everyone to be doing the same thing. So a couple of things I just want to touch on before we go to the Q&A. What if is another thing to have on your radar as a potential red flag for someone feeling anxious, because what if links us right the way back to that catastrophizing. It's telling you that someone's mind is going out way into the future to something that isn't relevant now, but it's triggering their response. Quite often, so if someone said, for example, what if we're late? You can respond with something that pacifies them. You know, I've delivered this training session many, many times. I'm really confident we're going to be finishing on time. If that closes the discussion, brilliant. However, if someone comes back with, yeah, but what if? Or yeah, but what if? That is a real red flag to you. This person is catastrophizing. And there's a very simple little thing that you can do. It's a great technique. It's my favorite that I use therapeutically. It's called flip it. If someone says, what if we're late? You flip back the opposite. Yeah, but what if we're early? Because the mind is programmed, as we've already said, to answer any question that you give it. So if you give them a question, what if we're early? Their mind will trundle off down that path as well. And if any of you have got teenagers, again, teenagers are absolutely brilliant at what if questions. And I got a lovely memory of my daughter had a birthday party. There was about half a dozen teenage girls sitting at my kitchen table. And one of the girls said, what if I fail the exam next week? And my daughter spontaneously went, yeah, but what if you don't? And this girl just turned around and went, yeah, well, I suppose I might not. Anxiety completely dropped. So flipping it is a lovely technique to have in your tool bag to bring out when you may be able to use it. We've spoken about comfort zone. Comfort zones are all different sizes. The smaller comfort zone, the harder it is to step out of it and do something new. So for your anxious people, what you want to be trying to do is to keep helping them make small steps. For more confident people, they can take quite a big leap. They're okay, you don't need to worry about them. They'll do that anyway. But the risk is if you only do one small step and then leave them, they will shrink back into that comfort zone. You need to keep them moving. So within your activities, keep having, right, we've stopped there. Now let's do something else. It's a new thing. We've stopped there. Now let's do something else. It's a new step. And you keep building on that comfort zone growth, because the further they go out, the easier it is to take the next step, and you keep them moving on with you. And finally, something that I like to do, especially if I'm running a longer session, perhaps a day's event, is I start to mentally segment the people in the room. My green learners, are those ones that are mentally quite resilient, confident, and I will want to push them outside of their comfort zone. And I want to push them probably, again, further than they want to go. So they're the ones I'm going to specifically ask the trickier questions, or going to be put them in a position where they are outside of their comfort zone, because I want them to grow. Whereas my red learners are my anxious ones. There's the ones I'm going to be thinking, okay, this is a relatively simple question. I want them to feel that they're contributing. I want them to feel that they're growing. So those questions are going to go to them. So again, be thinking, how can you make sure that everyone is interacting with you, is contributing to this pack, this community, so that they feel unified and part of what is going on. So just before we start the Q&A, let's just pull all of this together. When you start your session, normalize anxiety. Acknowledge that there's going to be a variety of different levels of anxiety in the room, and that's absolutely okay, because we all have a different perception of risk. But it's important you feel a little bit outside of your comfort zone, because that's where you're going to grow. And that's what we're here today, is to grow. You can use the blue things exercise or another one that ticks the same boxes to help create that environment where everyone has just done something normal, and you can bring out those learning points. No stupid answers, no silly questions. Then start be thinking about, what can you do to reduce risk right the way before someone even attends your session, the joining instructions, through to when you start in the room, through to clarity of instructions when you're giving out your activities. Signpost, make it clear what's coming next, because if you surprise an anxious person, you will lose them, even if it's only temporarily, and they will be slipping backwards. And what can you do to create that unifying behavior? How can you use humor to get everyone chuckling? How can you use your language to create that rapport, to be part of a whole? And keep going around those, remembering that you as a trainer will not be experiencing risk. You do feel unified because you are the leader of this organization. But the most important thing that you can do, and if there's nothing else you take from this session, is recognizing that they, as learners, are not going to be in the same position as you. They are not in the same comfort zone. So if someone is feeling anxious, step into their shoes, try and work out what is the perceived risk for them, give them back control, and bring them in to that community that you have. So thank you very much for staying with me. I hope you've learned an awful lot. And let me hand back to Drew to see if there's any questions that have come out throughout the session.
Excellent. First of all, Caroline, thank you so much. There's so many takeaways, tips, tricks that we can all take away from the classroom there. That neurodiversity piece that you were talking about, it resonates so much with me. I've got an 8-year-old daughter who suffers from global developmental delay, and the details that you mentioned there is so specific in my world, because you have to do that transition with her processing speed when you're moving from one activity to the next, and that detail that you mentioned there is so pertinent for my daughter to be able to move from what she's doing at that moment into something that is, it could be dinner, it could be tea, it could be breakfast. It's that transition piece, and I think it's absolutely. Yes. And I think that statistic, 1 in 5, amazing, and the level of detail that allows us to step into those shoes and into the world, really, really good. So thank you, Caroline. There is some questions here. I'm going to come to Mike first. Mike, there was a couple of questions that came in from you. In terms of language, someone using you statements instead of I, is that mostly a sign of anxiety, or could it also represent a decent level of emotional intelligence and high abilities to communicate?
Brilliant question, Mike. And yes, you're absolutely right. It could be the sign of someone that's had emotional intelligence. So to try and identify what the underlying behavior is, look for some of those other cues. So someone that has a high level of emotional intelligence is probably going to be looking around the rest of the room, is going to be bringing in other people. Their non-verbal communication is more likely to be very strong, whereas someone that's feeling anxious and using that language is more likely to only have their vision with you and will more likely have a closed body language. It's not, I would love to say, oh, it's black and white, it's easy. There's many, many shades of grey, and it's about using a number of cues to help you try and make the decision that allows you to have the behaviour that's going to optimise that individual's experience.
Excellent. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Mike, for the question. I think there was
Great
another
question.
one. I think there was another one, Mike, in there. I might have lost it. It might be further up, but if
no, it's all right. Caroline indirectly answered it when she carried on speaking, so I took the other question away, which was great, which was perfect.
Brilliant.
Thanks,
Mike. Thanks, Mike. I don't think that there were any other questions in there. Just one just as a kind of perhaps summary to conclude, Caroline, is from a kind of your position, an advisory point. Is there a favorite book or podcast around this subject that you would recommend?
Yeah, there are so many books out there. The one person that I follow and have learnt a huge amount from is someone called Dr. Joe Dispenza. That's a gentleman, Joe. Dispenza is spelt Dispenza. He has a number of books. The first one is called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I particularly love him because he really looks at the science behind emotions. So he has a great website, sends out lots of newsletters as well. So he's a great person to look into if you're interested. There is another book called Taming the Gremlin, which is by Rick Carson, I think his name. That's quite a good one. Another one that's often quoted to me that is fairly familiar to many is The Chimp Paradox. There's a lot in there I agree with, but the underlying principle, personally, I really don't agree with, because Dr. Stephen Peters, I think, is the author, positions the chimp as being something that's quite malicious, that's trying to kind of keep you in your box, keep you in your cage. Whereas my experience of anxiety is we use it in a positive way to help you grow. But, again, horses for courses. But yeah, so Dr. Joe Dispenza, generally his books are very good, and he has a lot of stuff online that you can access, or books. Taming Your Gremlin is quite a nice one.
Fantastic. Caroline, I think that is all of our questions.
Cool. Well, if anyone posts this or watching it on the catch up, if you have questions, please do contact me. You can contact me through the website. And also that representational system is on the resources page of the website, so carolinekavanagh.co.uk, or do link up with me on LinkedIn. I love extending my network on there, so feel free to find me on there. And I'm very, very happy to offer some time to anyone that wants to improve their skills, because the more we can help our anxious learners, the more we all benefit.